Thomas Fletcher had been alone for so long. He forgot what it felt like to have someone care about him. At 35 years old, he worked the same cattle ranch in the quiet hills of Yorkshire, England, where rolling green fields stretched as far as the eye could see. Every morning was the same for Thomas. He woke up before sunrise in his small cottage on the edge of the property. The cottage was simple but clean, with just one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a sitting room with an old fireplace. Thomas had lived there for 15 years, and in all that time, he had never invited anyone inside. Thomas would make his morning tea in the same chipped blue mug his mother had given him years ago. It was one of the few things he had left of his family. He would stand by his small window, looking out at the misty fields while he drank his tea. The steam from his mug would fog up the glass, and sometimes Thomas would draw little pictures in the condensation with his finger, just like he used to do as a child after his tea. Thomas would put on his worn leather boots and his thick woolen coat. He would walk across the yard to the stables, where the horses would greet him with soft nickering sounds. There was old Belle, a gentle brown mare who had been on the ranch longer than Thomas himself. There was Storm, a strong black horse who could be stubborn but had a good heart, and there was Daisy, a young spotted pony who always seemed happy to see Thomas coming with her morning oats. Thomas talked to the horses more than he talked to people. He would tell them about the weather, about his plans for the day, sometimes even about his dreams. The horses would listen with their big, kind eyes. And Thomas felt less alone when he was with them. The other ranch workers were good men. There was old Charlie, who had worked with cattle for 40 years and knew everything about ranch life. There was young Ben, who was always eager to learn and full of energy. There was Sam, the quiet one who could fix anything that broke on the ranch. They were friendly enough to Thomas, always saying good morning and asking how he was doing. But Thomas kept himself apart from them when they invited him to join them for lunch. He would make an excuse about needing to check the fences. When they went to the village pub after work on Fridays, Thomas would go straight home to his cottage. When they talked about their wives and children, Thomas would find a reason to walk away. Thomas had learned long ago that it was easier to be alone than to risk losing someone you loved. When he was just 20 years old, his parents had been driving home from town on a rainy night. Their car had slipped on the wet road and crashed into a tree. Thomas lost both of them in one terrible moment, and the pain had been so deep that he thought it might kill him too. Since then, Thomas had built walls round his heart. Just like the stone walls that divided the fields on the ranch, those walls kept the sheep and cattle where they belonged, and Thomas's emotional walls kept his heart safe from being hurt again. He worked hard from sunrise to sunset, saved every penny he earned, and never asked for help from anyone. Thomas found peace in the simple rhythm of ranch life. He would spend his days walking the fields, checking that the fences were strong and the gates were secure. He would count the cattle to make sure none had wandered off or gotten sick. He would clean the water troughs and spread fresh hay in the feeding areas. The work was hard but honest, and Thomas took pride in doing it well. In the evenings, Thomas would return to his cottage, make a simple dinner, and sit by his fireplace reading old books. He had read the same books many times, but they were like old friends to him. Sometimes he would write letters to no one in particular, just to practice putting his thoughts into words. He would fold the letters up and put them in a wooden box under his bed, along with old photographs and his parents' wedding rings. But now, after 15 years of this peaceful, lonely life, everything was about to change. Mr. Henderson, the ranch owner, was a kind man in his 70s who had always treated his workers fairly. He had inherited the ranch from his own father and had hoped to pass it down to his children. But his son lived in London and worked in banking. And his daughter lived in Australia with her own family. Neither of them wanted to move to the countryside to run a cattle ranch. On a grey morning in early autumn, Mr. Henderson called all the workers together in the main barn. Thomas could see the sadness in the old man's eyes before he even spoke. "I'm sorry to tell you all," Mr. Henderson said, his voice heavy with sadness. "I'm getting old. And my children don't want to keep the ranch. We're selling the land to developers. They plan to build houses here." Thomas felt his heart sink like a stone dropping into a deep pond. This ranch wasn't just his job. It was his home. It was the only place where he felt he belonged. The thought of losing it made him feel more alone than ever. That night, Thomas sat on his small porch, looking out at the fields he had cared for all these years. The stars were bright in the clear country sky, but Thomas had never felt so lost. He had no family to turn to, no close friends to help him through this difficult time. "What will I do now?" he whispered to himself, his voice carrying across the quiet countryside. Little did Thomas know that his life was about to change in ways he could never imagine. Sometimes, when we feel most alone, help comes from the most unexpected places. The next morning brought something Thomas had never seen before: a woman stepping off the small country bus that rarely carried strangers to their quiet village. The old red bus whizzed to a stop at the village crossroads, and the doors opened. With a squeak that echoed across the empty countryside, Emma Watson stepped down carefully, carrying only a small brown suitcase that looked almost as tired as she did. She wore a simple blue dress that had seen better days, with tiny flowers printed on the fabric that had faded from many washings. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat bun, but small strands had escaped during her long journey and now framed. Her pale face. Emma had kind eyes, the sort of eyes that had seen much sadness but still held gentleness within them. She looked tired, as if she had been traveling for a very long time, not just on the bus but through life itself. In her free hand, she clutched a wrinkled letter from a lawyer's office in London. The envelope was worn from being handled so many times, and the edges were soft like old fabric. The bus driver, a cheerful man named Fred who had been driving the same route for 20 years, called out to her, "You sure this is where you want to be?" "Miss, there's not much here except farms and sheep." Emma looked round at the rolling green hills, the stone walls that divided the fields, and the peaceful countryside that stretched in every direction. "Yes," she said quietly, "this is exactly where I need to be." Fred shrugged and closed the bus doors. The red bus rumbled away down the narrow country road, leaving Emma standing alone at the crossroads with her suitcase and her letter. Emma had been a nurse in the busy city hospitals of London, caring for sick children with all her heart and soul. She had always known that she wanted to help people, especially little ones who are scared and hurting. For 10 years, she had worked in the children's ward, holding small hands during frightening procedures, reading bedtime stories to lonely patients, and celebrating with families when their children got better. But 6 months ago, something terrible had happened that changed everything for Emma. She had been caring for a little boy named Jamie, who was only 7 years old and fighting a serious illness. Jamie had no family to visit him, so Emma had become like a big sister to him. She would stay late after her shifts ended, just to make sure he wasn't alone. She brought him picture books and taught him to play card games. Jamie would light up whenever he saw Emma coming down the hospital corridor. Despite all the doctor's efforts and all of Emma's loving care, Jamie had not gotten better. One quiet Tuesday morning, Emma had arrived at work to find his bed empty. The little boy she had grown to love like her own brother was gone, and Emma felt like a piece of her heart had been torn away. After that, Emma could no longer find joy in her work. The hospital corridors that had once felt like home now felt cold and empty. She would look at the other sick children and feel overwhelmed by sadness instead of hope. The bustling city that had once excited her now felt too loud, too crowded, too full of painful memories. Emma had been sitting in her small London apartment one rainy evening, wondering what to do with her life, when the letter arrived. The return address showed a lawyer's office she had never heard of, and inside was news that changed everything. The letter told her that her great-uncle William, whom she had never met and barely knew existed, had died and left her half of his property in Yorkshire. Emma's mother had mentioned Uncle William only once or twice, saying he was her grandfather's brother who had moved to the countryside years ago and never married. The lawyer explained that Uncle William had owned a cattle ranch with another man named Mr. Henderson, and now that other man would have to share the land with her. Emma knew absolutely nothing about Ran. Life, she had grown up in London, surrounded by tall buildings and busy streets. She had never even seen a cow up close, let alone cared for one. But she was desperate for a fresh start, somewhere far from the memories that haunted her dreams and made her wake up crying in the middle of the night. Emma had packed her few belongings, said goodbye to her small apartment, and bought a train ticket to Yorkshire. She had no plan, no idea what she would find when she arrived, but she knew she could not stay in London any longer. Now, standing at the country crossroads with her suitcase in hand, Emma felt nervous, but also strangely hopeful. She asked directions from a farmer driving his tractor and walked down the winding country lane toward what the lawyer's letter had described as Willowbrook Ranch. When Emma arrived at the ranch, she found a tall man with dark hair fixing a broken wooden gate. He was wearing work clothes and had strong hands that moved skillfully as he hammered new boards into place. He looked up, surprised to see a stranger on the property, especially a woman in a city dress carrying a suitcase. "Can I help you, Miss?" Thomas asked, setting down his hammer and wiping his hands on a cloth. "I'm Emma Watson," she said nervously, her voice soft but clear. "I believe I own half of this ranch now. My great-uncle William left it to me." Thomas felt his heart drop like a stone falling down a well. Not only was he losing his job because Mr. Henderson was selling to developers, but now a stranger, someone who probably knew nothing about ranch life, would be making decisions about his home. "I suppose you'll be wanting to sell your half to the developers too," Thomas said, unable to hide the disappointment in his voice. Emma looked round at the beautiful green fields that rolled like ocean waves toward the horizon, the gentle hills dotted with white sheep, and the peaceful countryside that seemed to breathe with quiet life. For the first time in months, she felt something stirring in her heart. Not the heavy sadness that had weighed her down, but something lighter that might have been hope. "I don't know," she said softly, almost whispering. "I don't know anything about ranching, but this place feels different. It feels peaceful." Thomas studied her face and saw something he recognized in her tired eyes. The same loneliness and pain he carried in his own heart. Maybe this stranger understood what it felt like to lose everything that mattered. Maybe she was running from something too. In the weeks that followed, Thomas found himself in an impossible situation that he had never imagined he would face. He needed Emma's help to keep the ranch running while Mr. Henderson looked for buyers. And Emma needed Thomas to teach her everything about caring for cattle and horses. Neither of them had chosen this partnership, but circumstances had forced them together like two puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit at first. Their partnership was more awkward than a dance between two people who had never met before. Thomas had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten how to share space with another person. He would wake up before sunrise, as he had done for 15 years, and quietly make his way to the stables in the grey morning light. But now, Emma would stumble out of the main farmhouse where Mr. Henderson had told her she could stay, still learning how to make proper countryside breakfast on the old wood-burning stove. Emma had never cooked on anything but a modern electric stove in her London apartment. The big black range in the farmhouse kitchen looked like a monster to her, with its heavy iron doors and the need to keep feeding it wood to keep the fire burning. Her first attempts at making breakfast resulted in burned porridge and eggs that were somehow both raw and crispy at the same time. She would bring Thomas tea in the mornings, carrying it carefully across the yard in a chipped china cup that rattled on its saucer. But the tea was always too weak, nothing like the strong dark brew that Thomas was used to making for himself. He was too polite to complain. But Emma could see him wince slightly when he took his first sip. Emma tried her best to help with the animals, but she was afraid of the large cattle with their big brown eyes and massive bodies. When Thomas asked her to help him move a group of cows from one field to another, Emma would stand at the gate, her heart pounding, not sure how to make the huge creatures go where they were supposed to go. The cows seemed to sense her nervousness, and would sometimes just stand there, chewing their grass and looking at her with what seemed like mild amusement. Thomas would have to come over and gently guide both Emma and the cattle, his movements calm and confident. "Don't worry," Thomas said one morning, his voice gentler than usual when he saw Emma backing away from a particularly large cow. "The cows are more afraid of you than you are of them. Just move slowly and speak softly." Emma watched as Thomas approached a nervous young calf that had gotten separated from its mother. The little animal was making distressed sounds and dancing round the field. Not sure which way to go, Thomas's movements were calm and sure, like a man who had done this thousands of times before. His voice was soothing, almost like a lullaby, as he spoke to the frightened calf. "Easy there, little one," Thomas murmured, extending his hand slowly. "Your mama is just over there. Let's get you back to her." The calf stopped its panicked movements and allowed Thomas to gently guide it back to the herd. The reunion between mother and baby made Emma smile for the first time in days. "You have a gift with them," Emma said, genuinely impressed by what she had just witnessed. Thomas felt his cheeks warm at the compliment. It had been so long since anyone had noticed his work or cared about his skills. Most people saw ranch work as simple and dirty, not understanding the patience and knowledge it required. As the days passed, Emma proved to be a much quicker learner than either of them had expected. Her nursing background, which had seemed so useless on a cattle ranch, actually helped her in ways she had not anticipated. She could notice when animals were sick or hurt, picking up on small signs that something was wrong. She had gentle hands, from years of caring for patients, and a caring heart that the animals seemed to sense and trust. When old Belle, the brown mare, developed a limp, Emma was the first to notice that the horse was favoring her left front leg. When one of the sheep seemed listless and wasn't eating with the rest of the flock, Emma spotted the problem before Thomas did. Her years of watching over sick children had taught her to notice when someone wasn't feeling well. One evening, when a harsh storm rolled across the Yorkshire countryside like an angry giant, Emma found Thomas in the barn. The wind was howling outside, and rain was drumming on the roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. Thomas was sitting on a bale of hay next to Storm, the black horse, who was clearly not feeling well. The horse was lying down, which was unusual, and his breathing seemed labored. "You don't have to stay," Thomas said when he saw Emma coming into the barn with a heavy coat over nightgown. Lightning makes some people nervous. I'm not afraid, Emma replied, settling down beside him on another bale of hay. She had brought a thermos of hot soup and 2 cups, steam rising from the warm liquid in the cool night air, in the hospital. I learned that sometimes the best medicine is just being there with someone who's hurting. They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the rain on the roof and the wind whizzing through the gaps in the barn walls. They took turns checking on Storm, offering him water and speaking to him in gentle voices. Thomas couldn't remember the last time someone had chosen to stay with him during a difficult time, especially someone who had no obligation to be there. As the hours passed and the storm raged outside, they found themselves talking in the way that people do when the rest of the world feels very far away. "Why did you really leave London?" Thomas asked quietly, his voice almost lost in the sound of the rain. Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands wrapped round her warm cup of soup. "I lost someone I cared about, a little patient named Jamie. He was only 7 years old, and he had no family. I couldn't save him, and I blamed myself. I thought maybe if I came somewhere new, the pain would hurt less." Thomas nodded, understanding completely. The pain in her voice was something he recognized from his own heart. "I lost my parents when I was young. I thought if I never got close to anyone again, I wouldn't have to feel that kind of pain ever again. But being alone hurts, too, doesn't it?" Emma asked softly, looking at him with those kind eyes that seemed to see right through all his carefully built walls. Thomas looked at her kind face in the dim lamplight of the storm lantern and realized she was right. Being alone did hurt, every single day, in ways he had tried not to think about for 15 long years. Spring came early that year, bringing new life to the ranch and new hope to Thomas and Emma's growing friendship. The harsh winter had melted away like sugar in warm tea, leaving behind fresh green grass that sprouted in every field and wildflowers that dotted the hillsides with splashes of yellow and purple. The lambs were being born, filling the air with their soft bleating, and the cattle were content to graze in the warming sunshine. Thomas and Emma had found their rhythm over the cold winter months, working together like a team that had been partners for years instead of just a few months. What had started as an awkward partnership born of necessity had grown into something that felt natural and right. They knew each other's habits now, could predict what the other person needed, and had developed their own way of communicating that required few words. Emma's gentle nature with the animals amazed Thomas every single day. She had overcome her initial fear of the large cattle and now moved among them with confidence and grace. She could calm a frightened horse with just her voice, speaking to them in the same soothing tones she had once used with scared children. In the hospital, she seemed to know instinctively when an animal needed extra care, whether it was a sheep with a small cut on its leg or a cow that wasn't eating as much as usual. The animals trusted Emma in a way that surprised even Thomas, who had been working with livestock his entire adult life. The horses would come to her when she called their names, and even the most stubborn cattle would follow her gentle guidance. She had a way of moving slowly and deliberately that never startled them, and her hands were always gentle when she touched them. Emma's nursing skills proved invaluable in ways neither of them had expected. When Thomas injured his shoulder after falling from his horse during a particularly difficult day trying to round up escaped cattle, Emma immediately took charge of the situation with the same calm authority she had once shown in hospital emergency rooms. "Hold still," Emma said firmly, helping Thomas back to the farmhouse and settling him in a chair by the kitchen table. She cleaned his wound with practiced hands that moved with the confidence of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. "You're lucky this isn't worse. You could have broken something." As she bandaged his shoulder, wrapping the white gauze round his arm with careful precision. Thomas marvelled at how natural it felt to let someone take care of him. For the first time since his parents died when he was 20 years old, he wasn't facing a problem completely alone. Someone was there to help him, to worry about him, to make sure he was all right. The sensation was both wonderful and terrifying. Thomas had spent so many years protecting himself from exactly this kind of dependence on another person, but sitting in Emma's gentle care, feeling her soft hands tending to his injury, he realized how much he had missed having someone who cared about his well-being, Emma. Thomas said one evening as they sat on the wooden porch of the farmhouse, watching the sunset paint the rolling hills in shades of gold and pink. The air was warm and sweet with the smell of spring flowers, and birds were singing their evening songs in the old oak tree beside the house. I've been thinking about something for weeks now. What if we don't sell to the developers? What if we try to keep the ranch running ourselves? Emma's eyes lit up with excitement, like candles being lit in a dark room. The idea of keeping the ranch, of making it their permanent home, filled her with a happiness she hadn't felt since before. Little Jamie died, but then doubt crept across her face like a shadow passing over the sun. Thomas, I don't know if we can make enough money just raising cattle, she said carefully. Mr. Henderson told me that the market isn't what it used to be. Big companies are taking over, and small ranches like this one are struggling to survive. Thomas had been thinking about this problem for weeks, turning it over in his mind like a puzzle he was trying to solve. What if we did something different? He asked, his voice growing more excited as he spoke. You're so good with healing, and you understand how to help people who are hurting. What if we use the ranch to help heal people? We could bring children here, children who are sick or sad or going through difficult times. They could learn to care for the animals, and the animals could help them feel better. Emma's breath caught in her throat as the full beauty of the idea hit her. It was perfect. A way to combine her nursing background and love for children with Thomas's deep knowledge of animals and ranch life. She could picture it clearly. Children who had been through trauma or illness finding peace and healing in the quiet countryside, learning to trust again through their relationships with gentle animals. Do you really think we could make it work? She asked, her voice filled with hope and uncertainty in equal measure. I think we could do anything if we worked together, Thomas said, and he meant every single word. Looking at Emma in the golden evening light, he realized that she had become much more than just a business partner or a friend. She had become the person he trusted most in the world. They spent the next few weeks planning their dream with the enthusiasm of children planning a great adventure. They would create a special program where children could visit the ranch, learn to care for gentle animals like the lambs and the calmer horses, and find peace in the quiet countryside that had healed both Thomas and Emma in their own ways. Emma would handle the medical side of things, using her nursing knowledge to understand each child's particular needs and challenges. Thomas would teach them about the animals, showing them how to feed and groom and care for creatures that depended on them for love and attention. But just as their plans were taking shape, and their dreams were beginning to feel real and possible, Emma received a letter that changed everything. The envelope bore the return address of the London hospital where she had worked, and inside was an offer that made her hands shake as she read it. The hospital was offering her a promotion to head nurse in the children's ward, with a salary that would solve all her financial problems and give her the security she had never had. It was everything she had worked toward during her years in London, the recognition and opportunity she had always dreamed of receiving. Emma stared at the letter for a long time, reading it over and over again, torn between the life she had built here with Thomas and the career she had worked so hard for in the city. The choice felt impossible, like being asked to choose between two pieces of her own heart. Emma held the letter from London for 3 long days, carrying it with her everywhere like a heavy stone in her pocket. She would take it out and read it again and again, each time hoping the words might change or that the decision would somehow become clearer. But the letter remained the same, and her heart remained torn between 2 completely different futures. She kept the letter hidden from Thomas at first, not because she wanted to deceive him, but because she was afraid of what she might see in his eyes when she told him. She had grown to care about Thomas deeply, more deeply than she had ever expected when she first stepped off that country bus months ago. The thought of hurting him made her feel sick to her stomach. Finally, on a quiet evening when they were sitting together on the farmhouse porch after finishing their daily work with the animals, Emma found the courage to tell Thomas about the letter. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed him the official hospital envelope. When Thomas finished reading, Emma saw something in his eyes she had never seen before: genuine fear. Not the kind of fear someone feels when facing a dangerous animal or a bad storm, but the deeper fear of losing something precious that might never come again. "It's a wonderful opportunity," Thomas said, trying very hard to hide his sadness behind a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You'd be helping so many children in the city. It's the kind of job you trained for all those years. But what about our plans for the ranch?" Emma asked, her voice small and uncertain. "What about the healing program we wanted to start together?" Thomas looked out at the fields they had worked together through the changing seasons, at the animals they had cared for with such love and attention, and at the dreams they had built side by side like 2 people constructing a house with their bare hands. The weight of the decision seemed to settle on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. "I can't ask you to give up your career for a dream that might not work," he said quietly, each word feeling like it was being pulled from somewhere deep inside his chest. "What we want to do here is just an idea. That job in London is real, with real money and real security." Emma felt her heart breaking into pieces as she listened to Thomas try to be noble and selfless. She had finally found a place where she belonged, a person who understood her completely, and work that felt meaningful, in ways her old hospital job never had. But the practical side of her mind, the part that had been trained to make sensible decisions, said the London job was the smart choice for a week. Emma walked round the ranch like someone caught between 2 worlds. She would work alongside Thomas during the day, but there was a sadness between them now, an unspoken knowledge that their time together might be ending. They were both trying to prepare themselves for a goodbye, even though neither of them wanted to say the word out loud. The decision was made for Emma 1 week later when something happened that changed everything. They had organized their first trial day with visiting children, a small test of their healing program idea. 3 local families had brought their children to the ranch. Kids who had been through difficult times and needed something special to help them heal. One of the children was Peter, an 8-year-old boy who had recently recovered from a serious illness that had kept him in the hospital for months. Peter was small for his age and still weak from his treatments, but his eyes lit up with excitement when he saw the gentle ponies Thomas had chosen especially for the children to ride. Everything was going perfectly until the accident happened. Peter was riding Buttercup, the calmest and most reliable pony on the ranch, when something startled the animal, perhaps a bird flying too close or a sudden noise from the barn. Buttercup shied to the side, and Peter, who was still not strong enough to hold on tightly, fell from the pony's back. The fall itself might not have been serious, but Peter's head struck a large rock that was hidden in the tall grass. The sound of the impact made everyone's heart stop, and Peter lay very still on the ground, not moving or making any sound, without hesitation. Emma and Thomas worked together like a perfectly coordinated team to save the boy's life, Emma's. Medical training took over immediately. She dropped to her knees beside Peter and began checking his injuries with hands that were steady despite her racing heart. She examined his pupils, felt for broken bones, and monitored his breathing while speaking to him in calm, reassuring tones. Thomas, meanwhile, kept the other children and their parents calm while making sure Peter stayed perfectly still. Until the ambulance could arrive. He had called for help on his mobile phone and now used his quiet, steady presence to create a sense of order in what could have been a chaotic and frightening situation. "You're going to be just fine, Peter," Emma said softly, holding the boy's small hand in hers while they waited for the paramedics. "Thomas and I are here with you, and we're not going anywhere." At the hospital in the nearby town, the doctors told Peter's parents that Emma's quick thinking and proper medical response had prevented what could have been a very serious brain injury. Because Emma had kept Peter still and monitored his condition properly, and because she had known exactly what information to give the paramedics when they arrived, the boy would make a full recovery. As they drove home from the hospital in Thomas's old truck, Emma realized something important that changed everything about her decision. In London, she had been just one nurse among hundreds of others, doing important work but often feeling like a small part of a huge machine. But here, with Thomas, she wasn't just doing a job. She was part of something bigger, something that mattered in a way that felt personal and meaningful. "Thomas," she said as they pulled up to the ranch, her voice clear and certain for the first time in days, "I'm not taking the London job." Thomas stopped the truck and looked at her with hope, shining in his eyes like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Are you absolutely sure?" "I'm sure," Emma said, taking his work-roughened hand in hers and feeling like she was finally, truly home. "This is where I belong. This is my home. This is my family." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching another beautiful countryside, sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, Thomas realized that his long years of loneliness were finally, completely over. He had found not just a partner for the ranch, but someone who loved him exactly as he was, with all his quiet ways and careful heart. "Emma," he said softly, his voice filled with all the emotion he had kept locked away for so many years. "I love you. I love you too, Thomas," she replied, squeezing his hand and feeling her heart fill with a happiness she had never imagined possible. 6 months later, Thomas and Emma were married in the little stone church in the village, surrounded by all the people who had become their chosen family, the local farmers who had welcomed Emma as one of their own, the children they had helped heal through their special program, and even some of the animals from the ranch who seemed to understand that this was a day for celebration. The ranch became exactly what they had dreamed it would be, a place where hurting children could find peace and healing, where gentle animals provided comfort and friendship, and where lonely people had discovered that love really could heal any wound. No matter how deep or old, Thomas looked at his beautiful wife and the life they had built together with their own hands and hearts. He understood something important that would stay with him forever. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find what you truly need. Family isn't just about the people who share your blood. It's about the people who choose to stay with you, who choose to love you through good times and difficult times, and who choose to build something beautiful together from whatever materials life gives them.